All right, how many of you have had this thought? Man, I never thought that things would ever happen this way. I mean, by the time I got to this age, I thought I would be here or I would be there. Maybe I thought in my mind that things would go in this particular direction, and unfortunately, it never went that way. As a matter of fact, it went the opposite way, and things got really bad really quickly. How many of us have been depressed looking at the condition or the status of our life, not realizing that God actually had a better plan than anything we could possibly imagine? Folks, I think that's the subject I want to remind myself of, and I want to remind you of. When we look at the way God plans our lives out, as long as we are resting in Him, we don't ever have to worry about what metrics we set in front of us concerning where we think we should be. You see, God's sovereign hand is always guiding us and is always leading us. Think about the time where Jesus goes to his disciples and begins to describe to the disciples how he would suffer, how he would be persecuted, and even how he would be killed. The disciples go to him and say, "May it never be." Jesus says, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Now, can you imagine the confusion that the disciples must have felt at that point? Can you imagine how troubled they were when Jesus actually said that terrible things would happen that these guys never thought? Remember, these guys thought that Jesus would basically rule the world immediately and at that time and overthrow the Roman government. They never saw Jesus as a suffering servant who would be crucified. And what's even more interesting is in the time that they were in at that very moment, they had their own plans for what they knew Jesus would eventually do. They said, "We're going to be in his kingdom. We'll be on his right hand or on his left." They actually had arguments over whether or not someone was going to be on his right hand or on his left. But if they planned it out and it happened the way they planned it out, folks, we wouldn't even be here right now. Me and you would not have the option for salvation, because if these guys had it their way, it would have gone a completely different way and there'd be no salvation. I want to ask you to consider something very important. If you are a believer and you've given your life to the Lord, if things are not going the way you thought they would go right now, let me challenge you to trust that God knows better than you. Let me challenge you to realize that God's plan is always going to be the best plan for your life, and the way it turns out according to God's plan will be a zillion times better than anything you could have possibly ever even imagined. God is capable of doing that if you will trust him. Now, if you don't know him, you need to get to know him. We're going to talk about that today in today's service. We're going to have a conversation about what happens when the plans that we make are not the plans that God wants, and why it's important for us to go with what God wants. Folks, the results are tremendous, and I want you to understand there is victory in knowing, understanding, resting in, and trusting in the grace of God in your life, because his plans are always better. God bless you.